Hey, greetings, friends. It's me, Wayman29, and it snowed out today, so I'm wearing my winter hat, my kind of redneckish hat. Now, don't take offense to the term redneck. It's not all that bad. I use duct tape to fix everything here. I got a great PM from the user phantomburger. And he wanted to know my view on the transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And on the surface, the gist of the question is, why is the Old Testament God all slice and dice, and the New Testament God all lovey-dovey? So, This is how I look at it. I'm not going to give you. I'm not here to proselytize to anybody. That's not what I'm on YouTube for. And I'm more about learning about what people think and studying biblical literature and history, biblical history, and I love that sort of thing. So we're going to look at it from that kind of aspect. The Bible, everybody assumes, starts with Genesis. However, it does not. Some of the older texts, although they're interspersed, especially holy war hymns throughout the biblical text, the Song of the Sea, the Song of Deborah being a few of those, being older inside later texts. Other than that, Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, are actually written a little bit earlier, are written down a little bit earlier than the epic of the Hebrews, which is the first 5 books. And in those first 5 books, they're written, some believe there is probably about 4 writers. The J writer comes from Judah. The Elohim writer comes from Israel. Both of those, J and E, according to the documentary theory, that's from 922 to 722 BCE. Now the Green writer, P, the priestly context comes from Jerusalem, 722 BCE, not long after Hezekiah's reign. The redactor, some who believe that it's the priest Ezra, possibly, ends up being in the mid-5th century BCE. Deuteronomy, there's probably 3 writers to that. Those date from 640 BCE to the Exile, 587 BCE. So when we're talking about biblical text, the Torah was put together in that way. It was written down in its form later. So you have the history of the nations, then you have the epic. The primeval history in Genesis are the 2 creation stories, 2 flood stories, and that's why they appear that way, because they're from 2 different writers and they're combined. So why is the God of the Old Testament slice and dice? If you read anything from the Hindu texts like the Vedas, you will see this transition also. When the religion starts out, it's kind of peaceful, farmers, things like that. Then they start forming raiding parties. They cater more to the god Indra. And then after violence has wreaked havoc on the religion and on the believers, the religious leaders and people who are looking and viewing the culture say, our ideas about things are way too violent, we need to calm this down. So they pull a lot of the violence from the literature and they transform it into something metaphorically and inward sorts of things, rather than attacking outward. And that's exactly what has been done to the biblical text. Now, if you read Judges, which is the history, Joshua, Judges, they were the early tribal league, before all the tribes were a cohesive bunch, cohesive tribe. And the war hymn of Deborah Judges 4 and 5, I believe. Yeah, I believe it is. Are about tribes who some would show to holy war against, say, Philistines or whoever we're attacking, and some would not. So the idea was, hey, we're going to get our butts kicked if people don't show. So then they establish holy war codes, which saying if you don't show for holy war, we're going to come looking for you. And this happens when Saul cuts the ox into 12 pieces, or the heifer, and sends it to the 12 tribes of Israel to gather against the Philistines. And it was one reason why they elected to have a king to unite the tribes, so they could coordinate battles a heck of a lot better than some people showing and some people not showing. And the priestly caste did not really want to share power with the king, so you get the big speech by Samuel against the king, and the writer of that text was very much against kingship. So the writers of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and so the writers of 1st and 2nd Kings. Now, you go to Chronicles, a lot of the deeds or misdeeds by the kings are glossed over. They were for the kingship, so they did not write against it as harshly as Saul is portrayed, and people like Absalom is portrayed, David, all of his mistakes are highlighted, 1st, 2nd Kings, Samuel, things like that. So that just gives an overall picture. The people adopted law codes after they came out of the exile, and they had to do something with their newfound freedom, so to speak. So they looked to other nations and other cultures, and they basically patterned off the Hittites and the Babylonians to make these law codes in a very harsh environment. There were two castes of priests, as far as I know. Maybe there was more. The Levites and the priests of Aaron, who ends up having law codes in Deuteronomy. So that's why sometimes the same law codes, the reasons given are different. Like the law codes for the Sabbath. One is a Levite law code, and it says one thing, and you have the priests of Aaron given a law code on the Sabbath, which says another. One is, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, so all your slaves and people should rest on the Sabbath. The other one is because Yahweh rested, or the Elohim rested on the Sabbath on the seventh day, so you should rest. So you have two different things going on. And they were always competing against one another. So you have the power struggles going on. And so whenever they went in to conquer land, slice and dice, all these ideas would come into play and symbolized. And so the god was a war god, Yahweh, and he had a lot of attributes from Baal. He was a storm god, and so they have the big show off at the mountain with Elijah, and that was Baal and Yahweh competing against one another, to where Yahweh realizes possibly that he is too much like Baal, and Elijah's in the mountain. He passes before Elijah as wind, as earthquake, and as fire. He's not in all that, but he ends up being a still small voice. So that was the day when Yahweh changed his characteristics on revealing himself to the people. So as not to be confused with Baal, because Jezebel was trying really hard to push Baalism as a state religion, and those of the Yahweh cult and the priestly caste retaliated fiercely against that. And so you come to the primeval stage of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and the primeval history is basically from Genesis up to the calling of Abraham, are Yahweh and the gods creating man and then dealing with man personally, rather than as with the whole world. So here you have men trying to be like deities. First, man tries to gain the knowledge of good and evil, and they're tricked out of from eating of the tree of life by the serpent. They ate of the tree of good and evil, so now they know good and evil. And Yahweh said, we need to remove them from the garden lest they eat of the tree of life. So he became, in a way, afraid that they would eat from the tree of life and live forever as gods. So they were tricked by the serpent and denied that, just like the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was denied from eating the flower of life, eternal life, by the serpent, who took it to the depths of the waters when Gilgamesh fell asleep. So then, moving on, you have like the first murder happening, and then the Elohim, the Heavenly Council, mates with the humans. You have giants, man gods, kind of like Achilles, people running around, giants. The text of Enoch, which is a kind of a later Jewish text, was written about that. People wondered about it, so supporting texts were written about these giants and what they could have been. Now, in the stories of the ancient Near East, the flood comes because the people were being too noisy, but here the people become too much for Yahweh to stand, so he decides to flood them all out.